Hello, and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Businesses that adapt well to change grow 3 times faster than the industry average. As your business adapts, so should your data. RudderStack Transformations lets you customize your event data in real time with your own JavaScript or Python code. Join the RudderStack Transformation Challenge today for a chance to win a $1,000 cash prize just by submitting a transformation to the open-source RudderStack Transformation Library. Visit dataengineeringpodcast.com/RudderStack today to learn more. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Matt Turck about his annual report on the machine learning, AI, and data landscape and the insights around data infrastructure that he has gained in the process. So, Matt, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. A long-time listener, first-time caller, big fan of the show. I'm a venture capital investor. I'm a partner at FirstMark, which is an early-stage venture capital firm based in New York. And I've been a big fan and very active investor in the general space of data infrastructure, machine learning, and AI from the infra layer all the way to applications.
And do you remember how you first got involved in the overall area of data and data management?
Yeah, I started my career in technology as an entrepreneur. I was the co-founder of a company that was called Triple Hub Technologies that did enterprise search and knowledge management. I like to joke that today it would be a really hot AI company because ultimately it was all about unstructured data management, and we used a lot of Bayesian techniques at the time. But I remember that we had to work really hard to convince my now peers in venture capital that AI was really a thing. In particular, we had a CTO, Joaquin Delgado, who had a PhD in AI. And after a few pitches, we learned that we needed to downplay the fact that his PhD was in AI and instead position him as having a PhD in computer science, just because VCs were looking at us like, kid, have you not gotten the memo? AI is dead. Obviously that was pre deep learning and in the middle of an AI winter, so different times.
And so now that brings us to today, where you have been compiling and publishing this MAD landscape report for the past few years. And I'm wondering if you can just start by giving an overview about what that even is and some of the story behind how it got started and why you thought that that was a useful exercise.
I've been doing this for 11 years now. Yeah, look, the general idea is, quite frankly, it's originally it's for my own benefit. It's an exercise that I feel I need to do to be able to keep track of what's going on in the space. And so the work is really the key goal is doing the work. And I personally think that the era of the generalist VC has long gone, to the extent that it ever existed. And to be a good investor and a good board member, you need to have deep expertise in the space, or at least spend a considerable amount of time in the space. So that's one of the tools I use to do that. So it's really the forcing function of publishing that landscape every year that makes me just keep on top of the companies, the trends, and that's really all there is to it. Then there's two different approaches. I could decide to keep that as a sort of proprietary knowledge, or I could decide to sort of open source it. And the approach has always been to do the latter because I think it's just more fun and I just get more out of it by doing that. And it's just started a never-ending number of conversations with the community, and just find it both useful and immensely enjoyable.
But if you publish all of your hard work as a VC, then aren't all of your competition just going to snipe all of your potential investments?
Look, it's even worse than that. Actually, I don't know if that's a podcast conversation, but it's happened more than once over the years that this the landscape, but I also write this long kind of State of the Union blog post, and over the years, more than once, I've had some VC colleagues in meetings with me one on one say something in a certain way with the sentence organized in a certain way, and I was like, I literally wrote that. and you're playing it back to me during this meeting without realizing that you are, which is absolutely priceless. Yeah, look, it's the way I think about it is again like open source. Yes, there are downsides to open sourcing the analysis, but eventually the information is all out there, and people can compile it. And I don't write everything that's going through my mind as I do this. I write mostly what's out there in terms of facts, in terms of analysis, and it's more of a compilation exercise and analysis of market trends as opposed to where necessarily I think the world is going and or where the most interesting opportunities are. So I try to strike a balance, but ultimately try to make this as a free resource to the community for the bulk of it.
And in terms of that decision of what is it that's actually useful to include in the landscape, what are the things that are in my best interest to include in the landscape versus leave out? I'm just wondering what your initial approach was for figuring out what is the actual pieces of data that are relevant to the broader community. What are the questions that people are going to be asking about it, and how can I help to answer those questions based on the information that I include, and just kind of how that process has evolved from your very first edition to where you are today, where you've been doing it for, I think you said 11 years.
Yeah, look, I try to be broadly inclusive. I think that the difference this year is that we've had a much more opinionated approach to selecting which companies we get into the landscape or not. In prior years, we tended to give a particular priority to companies that were a bit later stage. Either they had higher revenue levels or they had raised more money or that kind of thing. This year, we decided to also include a bunch of companies that we found very interesting. That's particularly because we wanted to give a good amount of real estate on the landscape and in the writing to generative AI companies. And literally, most of those companies did not exist 6 months ago. So if we said we're only going to include Series B or later companies, then all the generative AI companies will not be in there. So that's one of the ways we're opinionated. But look, at some point we have 1,416 companies on the landscape. We could easily fit another 1,000 or 2,000 on it. So we have to make decisions. And by the way, we miss some companies. We get it wrong all the time, but the community is sure to let us know, and that's one of the ways it's been really interesting. We just learn a lot from it.
And also, 11 years ago, the overall space was much smaller, so you could fit it all in one graphic, which I'm sure is why you had that initial ambition of, hey, let's put it all in one place. And now
if only I had known.
Yeah, I imagine you're regretting that now. I'm gonna need to get one of those giant rolls of butcher paper.
Yes, exactly. Making a mental note next time to pick a space that doesn't expand. Maybe COBOL programming.
There you go. And to your point of, we publish it, we get it wrong, people give us feedback. I'm wondering what you see as the potential for being able to make this a properly open source activity where here's the code that we use to generate the visual, here's kind of the set of fields that you need to fill in, let's just update it piece by pull request so that people can add and remove things as they see fit. Like what are some of the potential risks that you see in that approach?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and that crossed our minds a couple of times over the years. I think one of the key editorial decision that wouldn't work there, would be much harder, is that a lot of companies, and quite often rightly so, think that they should be in many different categories at the same time. So in some case, it's probably true if you look at the cloud hyperscalers, or if you look at Databricks at this stage could probably have a logo in most of the boxes, especially on the left side of the landscape. However, it gets a little more complicated when you have a seed stage company that says, hey, we should really be in 27 subcategories.
Absolutely. And whenever I look at the MAD landscape, it also puts me in mind of the CNCF landscape that they've built. And I'm wondering kind of, did they copy you? Did you copy them? Is this just kind of a general paradigm of how to organize information? Like, I'm wondering what you see as the interplay between these types of visualizations of an overall ecosystem.
Yeah, it all started, I think, with the Lumascape back in the day, which was a MarTech landscape started by, I think that was Luma, the investment bank. I may forget the exact details, but that was the granddaddy or the OG of all those market maps, as far as I know. Where we did get inspired by the CNCF landscape this year, in part, is that for the first time we launched an interactive version of the landscape. If you go to mad.firstmarkcap.com, you'll see the interactive version. So, I like to joke that it's a big innovation because, apparently this World Wide Web thing is major, and you can actually get on this thing they call a website where you can click on the logos and have an interactive experience. So we're very proud to have done this year. But it's actually been very helpful. And you can also bring a card view, and as you click, you get stuff that was data that was provided by our friends at CB Insight. So it's good. So now the Mad Landscape is really a combination of the PDF landscape, the interactive version, and the write-up, the kind of state of the union write-up that we produce around it.
And as far as the overall landscape and the ecosystem that we're operating in and trying to catalog as these snapshots in time as you do this every year or roughly every year, I'm wondering over that period how you have seen the influence of the types of projects and companies that are founded as we go from this early stage of big data, everything is Hadoop, to where we are now, where everything is the modern data stack, and kind of the different splinters that kind of break off as we go along that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So indeed, the big initial sort of burst of energy into that ecosystem was really Hadoop and all the related technologies. And actually, if you fast forward to this year in 2023, for the first time, we actually killed the Hadoop box, and we had kept it on there because the Hadoop footprint is actually much wider and stronger than one would suspect. So we kept it on there up until now, but now we've merged it. We've merged the vendors and the companies into the data lakes and data lakehouse box, but that was a little bit of the end of an era. And separately, indeed, the modern data stack was the big next phase, and as we all know, right, the creation of this whole ecosystem. So not just the cloud data warehouses, but all the tools, before and after. So in the last landscape, we had the emergence of brand new categories like reverse ETL, on the left side of the data warehouse, and on the right side of the data warehouse we had metric stores. So there's like all those new boxes that appeared. But yeah, the landscape has very much followed this. The poor parent of the landscape for many years was the right side, which is applications. So the way to think through the landscape is that roughly the left is data infrastructure, so that's where stuff is stored and computed and processed, and then the middle is data analytics. So data leaves and gets analyzed, and then the right side is like data gets used, so that's data applications. And for a very long time, the action was on the left side. And it really feels that this year, in part with generative AI, a lot of the action has truly and sort of finally started moving in earnest to the application side of the house, where it's become more apparent than ever how you use all those technologies. So I think again of like data moving from the warehouse, wherever it's stored, to BI on one side of the fork, and then on the other side of the fork, machine learning and AI, and then a lot of like ML and AI related applications.
Another interesting challenge of this ecosystem and this problem that you have created for yourself is that question of categorization, where, as you mentioned, Databricks could have a logo in every single box, basically. And also there's the question of how do you define what the categories are and what their boundaries are, because a lot of these different tools and products, maybe it started with a very narrow vision, but it has grown into encompassing some of the adjacent concerns. New capabilities, new categories have arisen. Maybe sometimes they're justified, maybe sometimes they're a flash in the pan. And I'm wondering what you see as a useful exercise to figure out what are the useful categories to break these things into, particularly as it has gone from a very linear flow of data starts in one place and ends up in the business intelligence dashboard to where we are now, where it's become cyclical through things like reverse ETL and AI being used in data infrastructure, and it's a tangled web more than it is a linear flow, if it ever was one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where you have to be somewhat opinionated and make calls. And look, we certainly don't pretend in this landscape. Again, it's an exercise rather than a definitive statement on how things are, and in many ways a way of like starting and generating conversations. But yeah, look, you have to be willing to explore, and you have to be agile on your feet. And sometimes you add a category, and sometimes you kill a category. So, for example, we had a metric store that was added in the last landscape, and we decided to remove it in this landscape. And what's interesting about this example is that the need for a metric store is very clear, and that's certainly very important. However, as a separate box, it's felt less justified because DBT launched their own metric store, and then they acquired Transform, and then you had another company in the space called Supergrain that pivoted. And then you had another company in the space in which I'm a proud investor called Trace that added a whole application layer on top of the metric store. And yes, there are other companies that position as metric store, but you end up with like one or two. And by the way, those companies do other things as well. So it sort of felt like killing the category as a separate box. Again, fully acknowledging that it's an important functionality, but killing the category as a separate box was the right thing to do.
Another interesting element of this problem is that there are some problems that are solved by companies that have their own set of founders and their opinions. There are some categories that are largely dominated by open source projects that don't necessarily have a strong kind of corporate owner. Many of them do. And I'm wondering what you have seen as the overall impact of investment and venture capital on the evolution of the data landscape, and which problems are focused on and paid attention to, and which of the problems maybe deserve attention but aren't being funded for whatever reason, whether it's societal, economic, pick your reason, particularly in the situation of the past few years where capital was very cheap and plentiful and easy to come by, and some of the ways that that has impacted the way that this landscape has grown.
Yeah, look, I think we are coming out of a pretty frenetic period of time in the data infrastructure landscape, which was in particular accelerated by the Snowflake IPO, which to this day is the most successful and biggest software IPO ever. I think that had pros and cons. The pros was that for a long time we were in that let a thousand flower blooms kind of mode where if you were a technical founder with enough experience in cloud and like and a vision, you could get money, which is great. So people were able to just start companies left and right and experiment. And that was very exciting in many ways. There were plenty of interesting companies that were started all of a second. The obvious drawback of this is that we ended up with categories that were overcrowded overnight, and overcrowded by companies that were all at the same time, and everyone was in the mode of, okay, this is a real problem, this category needs to exist. There is maybe another one or two companies in the space, but they're all early. Therefore, if we start or fund another company, will just have just as good a chance as anybody else. And yeah, as a result, we now the music has stopped in terms of financing, and everybody's looking around and trying to figure out which one of those companies are going to be able to survive. We certainly now in the market phase where the market is not going to be able to sustain all those companies, which again tend to be what I would call single feature companies through no fault of their own. It's just the nature of a young startup is that you start with something. You start with a product that typically looks like a feature, and that's how you should be doing it. But you need more time on Earth to be able to turn that feature into a product, and a product that's truly enterprise ready and adopted and deployed in production by many customers. And a lot of those companies were started in 2020 or 2021 or 2019, 2018. But at the end of the day, there are 2, 3, 4-year-old companies that are below, say, 5 million in ARR and in a bunch of different categories. And that's very much an uncomfortable place to be for those companies. So there's an oversupply of companies, an oversupply of products. And that is in the context where the buyers of technology, the customers, are under a very clear pressure from their CFOs and CEOs to cut costs or to keep costs under control. A situation where the VCs are under their own pressure to focus on their portfolio and be very discerning in the bets that they make going forward. And finally, a situation where the potential acquirers of those companies are going to very soon find themselves in a situation where they could pick any of 10 companies as the potential target that they will eventually acquire, which obviously will have a deflationary impact on the price of any of those potential acquisitions. So it's all of a sudden a little bit of a tough situation. Look, some companies will navigate this very well through a combination of skill, having money in the bank, and a bit of luck, and will emerge on the other side of this stronger, meaner, fitter. And I think that will work out great for the entrepreneurs and the VCs, but I think for everybody else, it's going to be more challenging.
Another interesting aspect of where we find ourselves today is the combination of capital isn't being distributed as freely as it has been the past few years, and it seems like a lot of the kind of focus and hype has reoriented from the data infrastructure level to these AI and ML focused product categories, particularly with things like generative AI and the advent of transformer models and the kind of general capabilities that are being built up there. And I'm wondering what you see as the interplay of kind of the state of data infrastructure as a broad category of problems and the kind of level of maturity that we've reached there, and the broad attention that's being paid both in terms of the enterprise and venture capital and technological investment, as well as the kind of flashy headlines that are coming out with things like ChatGPT, et cetera, and how that's going to influence where you see kind of new companies being founded.
Yeah, so for sure, the VC train has moved away from data infrastructure into generative AI. From a data infrastructure founder perspective, it's both a curse and a blessing, I would argue. It's certainly a curse because it's going to be tougher to raise that next round, especially if you're in a situation where you raised the prior round at a valuation that was way ahead of the reality of the business. At the same time, the blessing part, I think, is that you can now focus truly on the business, the product, and the customers with the relative comfort of knowing that you're not going to wake up tomorrow morning to 3 announcements from new companies that were just started and funded in your space, or a competitor that decided overnight to get into your space after they raised yet another big round. So that is helpful, I think, and the market is going to thin out. So if you are one of those companies that sticks around, that is, in this kind of survival mode or sort of fitness mode, right? Where you are truly efficient and really building product and selling customers and making customers happy and all the things. In many ways, if you're not completely over your skis in terms of valuation, you're in a in a pretty decent, challenging but pretty decent position. And again, I think some companies will emerge from all of this as the leaders in their category, and will find that what's currently happening is the best thing that could possibly happen to them, as opposed to just getting more money for free from VCs and getting distracted and having more competitors and more noise. So that's data infrastructure. If we look at the world of generative AI, and I don't know if that's a separate podcast or not, but if we look at the world of generative AI, my concern is that that situation in data infrastructure that we are now in the process of untangling is forming again in generative AI. And look, it's ultimately nobody's fault. It's easy to blame the VCs or the press or Twitter or what have you. It's the logic of the capitalistic system that VCs and founders, everybody in technology is looking for those disruptive moments when something very meaningful is happening. And clearly that's the case in generative AI. So clearly that's going to attract a lot of attention. It happens to be in the particular context of an otherwise very dire market. So generative AI is not just a major inflection point and possibly the next big platform of the future, but it's also the one bright spot in this challenging economy and certainly challenging tech world. So yes, people are rushing into it. The net effect of this is that all the stuff that happened in data infrastructure is happening now. So you have a bunch of companies that probably should not be started. You have a bunch of very technically strong machine learning engineers that are starting new ventures that in an ideal world would be excellent founding team members. But because they can and because they are courted by VCs who tell them, hey, if you want to start something, here's 5 million or 10 million or whatever the amount is. Those people are starting companies, and that's going to take a couple of years to play through the ecosystem of those companies are going to start. They are going to try and build a product that may or may not get to product market fit, especially given all the noise. And at some point, they will come to the conclusion that they will probably need to be part of other organizations. But when I say 2 years, it's probably more like 3, 4, or 5. So it is what it is. It's the logic of the system to go through those booms and busts. I think directionally it's produced great companies, but for somebody like me, I've been at Firstmark for 10 years now. Just during those 10 years, that's my third hype cycle in AI. The first one was after 2012. The second one was sometime around 2014, 2015. Feels like another one now. And those things typically don't end as well as one would think. So it is a little bit there's a little bit of that feeling of, okay, here we go again. But what can you do? It is exciting, and I'm excited for the founders who start businesses in the field. I'm making investments in the field, and you have to play the moment. Just one just needs to be ready for the inevitable backlash that will happen at one point or another. So more than ever, it's build AI businesses for the sake of building a business and making customers happy, and not because you can do cool things with generative AI.
And the other interesting thread between these two moments is that you can't build AI if you don't have solid data infrastructure and data engineering. And I'm wondering, from your conversations with people on both sides of that, how much you see people understanding the kind of dependency chain, and if you have seen any kind of concerning elements of people jumping straight into AI saying, well, all that stuff's done. I don't have to worry about that. I just throw data at it and it's good.
Yes, and I've certainly heard that, and I've heard the flip side of what's really hard is the data engineering stuff. Like the AI stuff is done. That's easy. That's just what you add on top. So it's a really good question, because that's a question we've been asking ourselves every single year when we do this mad landscape, is whether we should keep everything on one chart, especially as the real estate has become more and more expensive, because there's only so many little logos we can fit on one page. Whether the question has been whether we should do two landscapes, one for machine learning AI and one for data infrastructure. We've decided to keep everything on one precisely because of that symbiotic relationship. But that's one of the reasons why I'm very excited about AI. There's certainly the generative AI part, for sure, but almost separately from generative AI, I think we also are at a phase of the cycle where a lot of companies are much closer to having their data house in order than ever. And indeed, having your data house in order is the absolute requirement before you can do anything meaningful with machine learning and AI. So I'm excited to be at that phase of the cycle. And of course, that's the result of the modern data stack, which we talked about, but the rise of the data warehouses and the data lakehouses for the first time has brought us to the level of maturity where enterprise AI becomes truly a possibility at scale and in a ubiquitous manner. So look, not to be the VC that talks about his companies all the time, but have been a very proud investor and board member at Dataiku, which has now emerged as the leading enterprise AI data platform, and the acceleration over the last few years of that company as a bellwether of the broader industry has been really interesting to watch. And they have a close relationship with both Snowflake and now Databricks, and you can almost see it mechanically. The companies that have deployed Snowflake at scale, or Databricks at scale, or any comparable situation, have been turning their attention to enterprise AI, a part of which is generative AI, but most of which is actually not generative AI, most of which is fraud detection and churn prediction and supply chain management, inventory management, all those use cases that actually don't require GPT or an LLM or what have you. So we're really at that phase now where enterprise AI is going from being the poor parent of BI to being a first-class citizen in the enterprise.
In this phase of kind of adjustment or contraction, or however you want to phrase it, I'm wondering if there are any general product categories that you see as being particularly ripe for consolidation or being swallowed up by adjacent concerns or adjacent problem spaces, and if there are any kind of niche product areas that maybe look like they're an opportunity to be subsumed by other products or other companies that you see as actually likely to remain competitive as we move into this uncertain future.
Yeah, there's plenty, and by all means, a little bit like the metric store I was describing earlier, I don't mean any of those categories. I don't mean to say that any of those categories are not very important categories and that important companies will not emerge from those categories, not at all. But having said that, there are certain categories which are clearly ripe for evolution, consolidation, all the things. One of them, I think, is the world of data observability. And to some extent, that's already happened to some extent. As you remember, we used to have different categories or subcategories. There's like a whole data lineage world. And then there was data quality. And within data quality, there's declarative data quality. And there's like machine learning driven data quality. And then there's data observability, which covers some part of this or all of this at the same time. And we've already seen data lineage sort of disappear as a subcategory. To me, all of this is more or less the same thing. And look, if you speak to the companies as you do all the time, everybody's going in the same direction, which is to be the data dog of data, which again is 100% a beautiful prize if you get it, and a very ripe opportunity to build important companies. But all these companies are going to need to work together, and arguably, you could say that orchestration is a part of that whole discussion as well, because if you're a customer, ultimately what you want is not a data lineage vendor, data quality vendor, data observability vendor, and an orchestration vendor or open source project that you use. Ultimately, what you want is for your data to be of a high quality. If there's an issue, you want to hear about it quickly. You want to know where the data issue comes from, and then you want to be able to fix it. And all the things should kind of work together. And what I described is a combination, again, of like data quality, data lineage, and orchestration. So I think this whole world needs to evolve towards simplification. As painful as consolidation might be from a vendor perspective, so founders, VCs, and startups, from a customer perspective, consolidation is going to be generally very helpful, and I think very welcome, because that's less technologies that you need to become fluent with as a user. That's less contracts that you need to manage. That's definitely cheaper because you're not in a situation where every vendor needs to increase their revenue and increase their margin in order to get to the next round of financing. So that I think the customers are going to end up, being the beneficiaries of a lot of this. So that's one example: data observability, data quality. Again, not to pick on them. Another category for me clearly is MLOps. So I don't know if that falls into data infrastructure or AI or machine learning. That's another category where you've had the dozens of companies founded over the last few years, and some of them are closed source, some of them are open source, and some of them started doing data model management, data model governance, or AI fairness or AI transparency, and everybody's coming from a different angle. But fast forward to today, especially in a context where VC financing is less abundant, everyone is realizing that, okay, well, I have this product now, and I've been able to get to 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 million in revenue, but to grow into my valuation and win those categories, I'm going to not be just the best company in AI fairness, but also I'm going to need to expand and effectively become an MLOps platform, which again is not a feature, not a bug. That's how you want to grow as a startup. I just think this is going to need to get accelerated by the overall pressure on the category. So this is already starting to happen, and you see companies starting to do lots of different things and evolving towards a platform. But the market is not going to be able to sustain having 30 different MLOps platforms. So something is going to happen to that category for sure. Again, as always, some companies will do great. It's just not everyone.
Another interesting element of our current point in time and space is the fact that because of things like the Snowflake IPO, because of the general kind of evolution from Hadoop of this is operationally very heavyweight and difficult to manage, but we want to be able to get this power of being able to compute across massive data, to we can do this in a cloud data warehouse, but it doesn't solve everything. You can't use SQL for all of your business logic. Hence we have the modern data stack as kind of the de facto architectural paradigm. I'm wondering if you foresee any impact on kind of what that de facto architecture looks like as we move into this phase of contraction, as we have explored a lot of the potential space and tried figuring out kind of what is the proper balance of cost versus compute and scalability versus storage space, et cetera.
Yeah, this last 18 months or so, for the first time, I've seen the core principle of big data being challenged for the first time. And by core principle of big data, I mean this general idea that you should collect and store all of your data, and quite frankly, occasionally just figure out what to do with it later, which was, it was a whole Hadoop idea, like stop throwing out your data, just dump it into this big bucket, and then magic will ensue. So as we all know, it took a little bit of time for magic to actually ensue after that. Um, but that big data logic very much translated or carried over to the world of data warehouses. If you think of Snowflake, ultimately the beauty of it is that it's this infinitely elastic warehouse in the cloud, and the data lakes or data lake houses, like same general idea. Of course, storage is one thing, compute is another thing. As it turns out, if you dump a lot of data into those repositories and you try to compute all of it or even a significant portion of it at scale and repeatedly, is going to cost a lot of money. We are now clearly in a world where it's not okay to spend a lot of money, except if you have a very clear ROI for it. The CFO of each customer is now breathing down the neck of the data teams and data engineering teams, so a different paradigm. So I'm seeing an evolution of the conversation towards do we need all this data? If we do need all this data, what is it for? And if we have a clear business objective for all of this data, then are there cheaper, faster, easier ways of processing it? At the high end, I'm seeing the beginnings of new architectures coming up. So when I say new, look, it's stuff that has been percolating for a long period of time, but that seems to be accelerating. And a kind of architecture I'm seeing discussed a lot these days is, okay, well, let's do S3 for storage because that's not very expensive. And then to add a little bit of a structure, let's add stuff like, Iceberg or UDI. And then for a bit of OLAP, DuckDB is sort of emerging kind of out of nowhere as like everybody's favorite solution to at least talk about. And then for query, Trino. So possibly different tools, not necessarily those ones, but that's emerging as something that's a little different from your sort of centralized let's dump all the data in Snowflake kind of architecture. So I'm seeing that at the upper end of the market, and the reason for that is that you need smart data engineers to be able to figure that out and collect all those, connect all those things, stitch all the solutions together, and figure out how that works. At the lower end of the market, which by the way is sort of 90% of companies, I'm seeing the acceleration, it seems, of the fully managed data platforms, which felt like arguably a weird idea 2 or 3 years ago, and now seems pretty interesting and logical. So I don't know how big a market category that is, but I'm certainly seeing and hearing a lot. So by that I mean the Y42s and Mozart data of the world, or Kabula, which is a different approach, but like with the same end result. The former, that's really this idea of like abstracting away the modern data stack and using all the usual suspect vendors, but sort of like stitching them together and offering the customer just one contract and just one relationship. And ultimately, I assume with the general goal of being able to then turn around to the underlying vendors and negotiate better prices. So I think that's interesting, and I'm seeing people finding that interesting in a context where people want more simplicity, more convergence, and just don't have as much of a budget to hire a bunch of data engineers to do all the stitching together.
As the landscape has evolved, as the overall interest in this space has evolved, as you have gained a greater appreciation for the kind of nuance and detail that's necessary to be able to differentiate between some of these different vendors, the different product categories, why do we even care about this thing? How has that affected the way that you think about the presentation of that information in your collection for the MAD landscape, and the ways that you think about communicating around those vendors and product categories and tools?
I've tried to strike the right balance between evolving but also keeping the broad architecture of the landscape consistent over the years to make it easier for people to sort of compare. And it's actually it's fascinating. There's like a whole group of people in the community that sort of take those landscapes and compare the images and all the things. So like I've on the whole tried to keep it reasonably consistent.
In the process of building this landscape, investing in this space, working with some of these companies to help them understand kind of what are the competitive opportunities, what are the ways to think about positioning your tools and products, what are the problems that need to be solved. I'm wondering if there are any particularly interesting or innovative or unexpected entrants into the market that you have seen, whether as far as the way that they're attacking a particular problem space or the ways that they're thinking about trying to make themselves valuable to the broader ecosystem or indispensable in a particular way.
I don't know if those are necessarily innovative or different, but what I've seen again and again work is this general approach of starting as a tool and sometimes arguably even a toy and evolve bit by bit into a product and then over time a platform. And what I've seen conversely, often is companies that try to be more of a platform early on, and that's challenging. That's challenging. So that's one thing. Starting with a game plan in mind, with something that may feel like a little thing and a feature, but like over time evolves as you get product market fit around that product. And that's true in general, but that's certainly been true in data infrastructure. The second thing that comes to mind is there is a series of companies that have actually won their respective markets by doing something that's counterintuitive for a lot of deeply technical founders, which is building for the many and focusing on democratization and collaboration as opposed to trying to build the most bells and whistles for the more technical users. Because as it turns out, pretty often the number of very technical users that will appreciate the fine nuances of all the features that you build for them can turn out to be pretty small in an enterprise. So the perfect example is like this whole generation of platforms that build purely for data scientists. That's great for initial product market fit, but as it turns out, to this day, it's very hard to hire data scientists. There's just not that many of them around, and then they, to this day, don't always have the biggest budget versus an approach of saying, hey, data in the enterprise, it's not about the most technical users. It's actually a combination of tools and processes and humans, and it takes a village, and different people are going to be involved. Therefore, we're going to build tools that are approachable by many folks. And sometimes it's a combination of being very technical, but also no code, and then we're going to empower people around the organization. And the two things I just mentioned, this evolution from tool to platform and collaboration and democratization, those can be very related. You can start with a very technical tool and evolve towards a broadly democratized platform. But those are two of the strategies that I've seen succeed over the years.
And in your own experience of working in this space and trying to kind of gain perspective and understanding of the problems that are being addressed and how to solve them in useful and economical ways. What are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned personally?
In the world of VC over the last few years, for people that focus on data infrastructure, the typical heuristic has been, hey, let's find out founders who have built a platform within big tech company X, Y, or Z. So Uber, LinkedIn, Lyft, and several others being the usual suspects. Let's take that product, open source it if it's not already, and turn it into a brand new company that we VCs will fund. What I've learned over the years is that approach works, but doesn't work as systematically as the rapid funding around that model would lead one to believe. I think it turns out that a lot of the problems that you experience at an Airbnb or LinkedIn or any of those companies are years ahead of where the market is. And yes, you'll have the most thoughtful approach around the most vexing problems of getting to massive scale, but in terms of where the bulk of the market is, you're going to be just too disconnected. So that's one lesson, I think. So I'm not saying those deals are not great or those companies are not great. I'm just saying it's much less systematically successful or heuristic as one wouldn't believe. So that's one lesson. Another lesson is that you can be right on the analysis, but you can be wrong on the outcome. Meaning that time and again, it's very hard to predict where the market is going to be, and you can have the smartest founders building the most interesting product. Ultimately, this is an exercise in company creation, not in building the best product, even though you hope that one will follow the other. And that's why you sort of end back on the most obvious cliche of venture capital, which is to invest in the best people you can find. As it turns out, the best people is not necessarily just the most technically strong people you can find, but people who are truly starting companies because they want to focus on making customers happy and truly enjoy this interaction with customers. And I think the market, the VC market has led, the VC market being frothy as it was for a couple of years, has led to the creation of a bunch of companies that people started because they could and because the technology was really great, but ultimately, in part encouraged by the whole like PLG bottoms up marketing kind of way of going to market, where you don't really need to talk to customers, you don't really need to get on that awkward sales call, and you hope that people just like show up magically through your self-service and all the things. I think that whole combination of the frothy market plus PLG motion has led to the creation of a bunch of companies where people don't truly enjoy working hand in hand with customers. So you can be wrong on the analysis and right on the outcome, or vice versa. Therefore, pick the best people. Therefore, lesson learned around the best people, not necessarily the most technically astute folks, but folks who are both technically very strong and truly, in their heart of heart, enjoy working hand in hand with customers solving business problems.
And as you continue to work in this space and invest in these categories, what do you have planned for the future of the MAD landscape? Either ways that you want to think about updating its presentation or content, or ways to make it a long-term sustainable activity, either for yourself or putting it into the hands of kind of the broader ecosystem? Just kind of wondering what you have planned as you look forward.
Yeah, so I'm a I don't even really want to think about the Mad 2024, considering I'm just exiting the Mad 2023 period, which was an effort and a half. But look, as stated above, I very much want this to be a conversation. We are already going to make a second version of the Map 2023 landscape based on all the feedback we got. So we created an email address for comments, thoughts, and suggestion, which is mad2023 at firstmarkcap.com. We got hundreds of emails. We've been parsing through those. We're going to create a second version, as I said, of the landscape, trying to capture most of those comments, probably not all of them, but most of those comments. So that's the immediate future. In terms of 2024, yes, I do like the idea of open sourcing this even more to the community. But again, going back to the first principles of why I'm doing this for the forcing function of me doing the work. And then, through conversations like this, getting to complain about it. But I'm French, so complaining is one of the things I do best. So if I completely open source it to the community, or I had other people do it, then that would sort of defeat the purpose of really doing the work. So I'm probably mostly going to continue as is for the foreseeable future. Although again, I'm open to all sorts of thoughts and suggestions.
Are there any other aspects of your experience investing in and engaging with the data infrastructure landscape and your work on the MAD landscape for those purposes that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
No, I thought that was pretty thorough. I would look, a message of hope, I guess. The market is what it is. I do think that data infrastructure in general is the gift that keeps on giving. I think we keep going from phase to phase, from the world of the old MPP databases to Hadoop to the modern data stack to whatever it is that we're doing today. There's always something new. It's always a very fertile area to start companies. I think you want to be very careful in this market when starting something. You want to make sure that you are in it for the right reasons. You want to make sure that you truly enjoy working with customers on a daily basis and not just build product. Having said all of that, another VC cliche, but that's very true. This kind of market is a wonderful time to start a company. Talent is available. There's much less noise. You have more time to iterate. You have much less risk that 5 competitors are going to emerge overnight. So it's a great time to start the company, a company. And while everybody is busy trying to build the next thin layer on top of a chat GPT that gives you time to be thoughtful and deliberate in building the next great data infrastructure company. So by all means, do it thoughtfully, but don't hesitate. It's always a great area to build a company.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
I think there's a really interesting set of opportunities around generative AI for data, a little bit as a perfect end to this whole conversation that I find very interesting. I have seen a bunch of companies sort of jump into this opportunity, but a little bit to the other conversation around democratization and making data infrastructure available to a broad set of people within the enterprise. I think the opportunity for people beyond data analysts to interact with data analytics in particular, also potentially broader data infrastructure through English or through natural language is really intriguing. I don't know what it means yet. I don't think that it puts the jobs of data analysts at risk just yet. But I think it could be a very major unlock for the space. To this day, we're still very much in a situation where, if you think of the most basic output of this whole data infrastructure that we've been talking about, which is a BI dashboard, we're still very much in this world where it's the province of a handful of people in the enterprise. And as we all know, if you are the CEO or a senior ranking member of an organization, and you want some kind of BI analysis beyond the dashboard that's available to everyone, sure, the Tableau analyst or the Looker person in your organization will say, right away, I'll do, let me get on it, and you get the result within a few hours. If anybody else, which is really 95% of the organization, take a number and wait your turn. And that just doesn't feel like the best way of justifying all this investment in data and all this complexity around the tools. So look, the dream of self-service analytics has been around, forever. But I think generative AI tool as an interface to all of this gives really new life to the idea, and I think that's a really interesting and fertile area.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share your experiences of compiling this landscape. Thank you for all of the work that you've put into making it a reality and going to the effort of presenting it to the broader community and ecosystem. So I appreciate all of the time and effort that you and your team have put into that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tobias, for having me. Love the show.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other shows, Podcast.init, which covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used, and the Machine Learning Podcast, which helps you go from idea to production with machine learning. Visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends and coworkers.